The United Nations General Assembly meets to debate next week. Crises including the Gaza genocide, Ukraine war and climate change are placing the world body under severe scrutiny, facing pressure from the Trump administration too. What role can the gathering of world nations play? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. It is the 80th birthday of the United Nations, but celebration will be far from the minds of many delegates gathering in New York at the UN General Assembly. Genocide in Gaza, war in Ukraine, conflicts in Africa and a more volatile geopolitical climate will shape many of next week's debates. Recognition of a Palestinian state by long-term allies of Israel would mark the pages of history. The gathering of nations comes as the UN faces its own crises too. Paralysed by vetoes at the Security Council, it's been criticised for inaction on Gaza and Ukraine. Direct attacks from the Trump administration, including funding cuts, have hit the UN hard. All that as US relations with many countries are in upheaval too, with tariffs and threats and once firm alliances now under question. So, could all this give new importance to this year's UN General Assembly? And what would the gathering mean for the future of the United Nations? We'll speak to our guests shortly. But first, this report from 𝚆𝚑𝚗𝚎𝚗𝚎.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres rings the UN peace bell, a symbol of hope for peace. Leading UN representatives joined him as he called for action to, in his words, silence the guns.
80 years ago, the United Nations emerged from the ashes of war to pursue the cause of peace. That mission is the beating heart of our organization. But today, peace is under siege. Conflicts are multiplying. Civilians are suffering. Human rights and international law are being trampled.
The UN will host world leaders for its annual General Assembly later this month, under the theme Better Together, at a time when conflict is rife around the world. The General Assembly is the main debate and policy-making body of the UN. It's the only forum in the organisation where all 193 members are represented. Palestine and the Holy See, the diplomatic representative of the Roman Catholic Church, have observer status. The Assembly also approves the UN's annual budget, and it's under attack from its main funder. A few weeks after taking office again in January, US President Donald Trump criticized the effectiveness of the organization.
There are great hopes for it, but it's not being well run, to be honest, and they're not doing the job. A lot of these conflicts that we're working on should be settled, or at least we should have some help in settling them. We never seem to get help. That should be the primary purpose of the UN.
But critics say there's paralysis in one of the organization's key decision-making bodies. The 5 permanent member states of the UN Security Council, the US, France, China, Russia, and the UK, can veto decisions. The US has repeatedly vetoed UN Security Council resolutions demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. Many countries are looking to the UN for stronger and more decisive action on issues such as Israel's war on Gaza, which has killed more than 64,000 people during the past 23 months. International momentum is building in support of Palestinian statehood. On September the 12th, members of the General Assembly voted overwhelmingly in favour of a declaration calling for tangible steps towards a two-state solution. 142 supported the declaration, with 10 voting against and 12 abstaining.
Is adopted.
The General Assembly's President, Annalena Baerbock, has called casting doubt on the UN's role cynical and irresponsible. To prove she's right, both supporters and critics will likely be looking for the General Assembly to display its relevance and purpose when it meets in the coming days. 𝚆𝚑𝚗𝚎𝚗𝚎𝚗𝚎, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Donnacha 𝚆𝚒𝚜𝚎𝚗 is Professor of International Relations at Dublin City University. He joins us from Brussels. Shahd Hammouri is a lecturer in international law at the University of Kent. She joins us from Canterbury in the UK. And Hugh Lovatt is Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us from London. A warm welcome to you all. Donnacha, let's start with you. The UN's leadership will no doubt seek to strike a celebratory tone at the General Assembly as the body marks its 80th birthday. But is there much to celebrate?
Well, as Annalena Baerbock, the new president of the UN General Assembly, said, you know, the UN General Assembly may be at 80 years. That's exceeding the normal human lifespan around the world, but there's very little to celebrate because the UN General Assembly faces in many respects a number of crises which it seems unable to deal with. There's, you know, genocide in Gaza. There's Russia's ongoing full-scale invasion of Ukraine. She mentioned also the problems of women in Afghanistan, the climate emergency. Some of these problems have been going on for many years. Some of them are relatively new vintage. But the UN's inability to be not overcome by geopolitical alignments is an ongoing crisis that you might say goes back to the Cold War. But there seems to be certainly a renewed interest in reforming the UN. Certainly that was the import of her speech. There's reference to this pact for the future, for example. But there's been talk about this before, and all these plans for reforming the UN traditionally have been great in ambition, but rather short on detail and in timeframes.
But Donnacha, what would it take to reform the UN? How easy or difficult would that be?
Well, it would be very difficult. In many ways, the problems mirror those of the European Union. I'm speaking to you here in Brussels, and the European Union finds it very hard to act as a geopolitical actor because you need a unanimity, you need a consensus, and you only need one country to deviate from that consensus, and you're paralyzed. Similarly, the UN Security Council, over and over again, has had the agreement of all members of the UN Security Council, bar often it is the United States when it comes to issues relating to Palestine, and that has paralyzed the institution. And then there's the issue of membership, of course, as well. I mean, in many ways, the composition of the UN Security Council is an anachronism. It's frozen the victory or the victorious powers of World War II. So you have, France and France and the United Kingdom on the Security Council. You don't have Germany or Japan or Brazil or India, for that matter. So it's not representative of world opinion. And of course, there are also the issues as well about the trend in global politics. I think that's worth emphasizing, that there's been a general trend away from democracy, I think, globally, and towards a more authoritarian form of governance. That's reflected not only, of course, in traditional dictatorships, but also in the rise in authoritarianism within Europe, within America, of course. And that's a big challenge when trying to reach consensus at the United Nations as well.
Shahd, in his first term, Donald Trump withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Accord, the World Health Organization, the UN Human Rights Council. President Biden reversed that, only for Trump to withdraw the US again when he returned to the White House in January. The US, though, is still the largest funder of the UN, but Trump has made widespread cuts to foreign aid, including to many UN agencies. How much damage has that done to the organization and its work? Can the UN afford to do the work that it's supposed to do?
Well, what the United States of America is currently doing is coercing the United Nations into its own will. When Donald Trump says that the United Nations is not doing what it's meant to do, it's not doing what serves the U.S. best interest. So it is a way to dismantle this liberal system of the rule of law into coercion and into stopping it. And the reality is, of course, the United Nations is feeling it, and very deeply. For example, if you go to their Geneva office, they don't turn on the escalators to tell you that they have a financial crisis going forward and that they are unable to maintain their very high salary and budgets. However, while this does signal a crisis in the system, perhaps it does signal an opportunity of a change in the system. Nothing in upholding international peace and security demands that the system remains centralized within the number one perpetrator of international law, which is the United States of America. The United Nations could take a decision to change its location somewhere else where the costs of running it are much lower and where other states can contribute more into the budget as well as more effectively. As we speak now, Palestinian delegations haven't been able to make it to New York, and the US has used every single possible card in order to legitimize and stop any form of meaningful participation, not only by Palestine, but also by other states of the global south. So this moment does really pose an existential question to the United Nations as well as the whole international legal system. Is this system premised on the idea that international peace and security is serving the status quo, i.e. whatever is in the interest of NATO states and the overall power struggle between imperial powers, or is this a system that seeks to uphold international peace and security premised on equality and evading systems of domination and subjugation? What we're hoping is that this perhaps might be a moment of reckoning, but sadly enough, the president of the General Assembly that we see now herself is guilty of incitement on genocide, is not perhaps the best person to lead such a swift. So perhaps the United Nations will see a very strong downfall before we see it come back and what we hope to be a strong comeback with the leadership of the global south.
You raise some excellent issues there, which we'll come back to in a few minutes, Shahd. Hugh, what's the Trump administration's beef with the United Nations? Is it actively trying to disrupt the work of the United Nations? As NPR in the US said in a recent piece, can the UN survive the Trump administration?
The Trump administration's issue with the UN, I think, is multifaceted. Firstly, it is about, the identity of the international order. The United Nations was created in part through US leadership and was supposed to embody not just an international order, but a liberal international order, and also, to a certain extent, a vision of US interventionism to varying extents. I think this is clearly not where the Trump administration is. Whether the Trump administration is liberal or not, I think can certainly be questioned. The Trump administration has also made it clear that despite Trump claiming he wants to reassert US leadership, in practice this is about US retrenchment and US isolationism. But also, more practically, it is clear that the Trump administration does not really believe in multilateralism. It believes in making deals bilaterally between world leaders, between Trump and other leaders. So ultimately, I think these are some of the core components of sort of the Trump's increasingly hostile and aggressive relationship with the UN. But as has previously been said, this is ultimately about the US wanting the UN to do its own bidding, and that clearly cannot happen because of the composition of the United Nations Security Council, but also because the Trump administration is increasingly at odds with a lot of world opinion, especially when it comes to what's happening in Gaza and the Middle East.
Donnacha, genocide in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, conflicts in Africa, climate change, the more volatile geopolitical climate, all set to hang over the General Assembly this week. But to what extent will Israel's war on Gaza dominate proceedings this year?
I think they will dominate to a large extent because of the scale of the casualties, the geographical location, the interest of so many countries in the fate of Palestine. It has to remember that 3/4 of the UN member states recognize Palestine, and that's only increasing in number. There are a number of states, such as France and Belgium, from where I'm speaking now, which have stated their impending decision to recognize Palestine. So what happens in Palestine matters, and to see a genocide occurring in real time really shakes the conscience of world opinion, and to see the United Nations helpless as a bystander very much undermines the United Nations authority, because in many respects the reputation of the United Nations depends on two main things, really. I guess it's inclusiveness, the fact that all recognized states of the world are included in the UN, so it's very representative and inclusive, but also it's a norm setter. And when it sees the UN Security Council unable to intervene in what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine more generally, it fundamentally undermines the UN's raison d'etre, which was to regulate conflict, to prevent end conflict, to give a forum for people to deliberate. But when you have parties who are clearly acting in bad faith, and I'm echoing here the words of my predecessor, who, Donald Trump has made it clear that he's a revisionist when it comes to world affairs. He doesn't respect international law. He sees it as an American first type of agenda. And he said that in all sorts of ways, about